Saskatchewan Métis activists are facing legal threats for demanding transparency in their own government. I'm Sheila Gunn Reid, and you're watching The GUNN Show.
I say that processes and structures are put in place for a reason. If you are willing and ready to come and provide a healthy conversation that is positive and not so toxic, then yeah, everybody is welcome.
Co-chair of the MNS Ethics Committee, Brennan Morasti, says online debates have shifted from discussion to toxic attacks on employees. On August 25th, the nation released a statement saying the Provincial Métis Council passed a motion to issue cease-and-desist letters to those making false, harmful, and derogatory posts targeting MNS staff. Morasti says he believes it was the right decision.
And as a government, I stand by our decision and the support of our staff to protect and be safe and feel safe, because they continue to work around the clock.
Online, many posts question why MNS is spending money on legal notices against its own citizens instead of investing in them. Morasti says this does not take away from the services and support the nation provides.
We have budgets set aside for delivery of programs and services, and nothing has been halted or affected by this process. We continue to deliver the real results for our citizens across the board, and we will continue to do that while we deal with the legal matters at hand.
Jennifer Laewetz, a Korean Métis social media creator and APTN political pundit, received a cease and desist letter. She says the letters create barriers for citizens who want to be meaningfully involved in their government and ask tough questions of leaders.
And to create more barriers through the legal process is hard. You know, a lot of Indigenous people do not have the extra funds or money or even desire to want to fight more systems and to hire legal when we're raising kids and we're trying to be entrepreneurs and we're trying to just survive.
Métis lawyer Tyler Gervais also received a letter and says he has been banned from attending MNS government meetings. He says this is unfair to youth who want to become involved with the nation.
That to tell us to sit at home and to not be able to experience the ideals of our government, but to watch the live stream, and to tell my children that they can't participate and they can't come with me.
Megan Nolan also received a letter. Nolan believes they are an attempt to silence concerned citizens. When asked what they would like to see happen, Nolan says it is time for a forensic audit and for leadership to take accountability.
In my opinion, you need to have integrity. You need to have accountability. You need to be able to be transparent. You need to be able to get called names and that's okay and take it. You're a politician. And you need to be able to have relations with your people.
Kathy Pruden-Nansel, a former MNS elected official, also received a cease and desist letter. She says the unrest amongst citizens isn't about one or two people being upset, but about leaders not listening to what is being said.
They've ignored so many things and they are not being transparent, and the citizens are the ones driving this. Not me as an individual, not Tyler, not Jen, not Megan as individuals. This is citizen-driven.
APTN reached out to MNS with the comments made by those who received cease and desist letters. They declined further comment. MNS is having their next Métis Legislative Assembly on September 6th and 7th at Prairieland Park in Saskatoon.
Jennifer Laewetz is a former Conservative staffer and a member of the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, and she was among dozens of people hit with cease and desist letters after posing serious questions about the nation's governance. The legal threat letter that she received accused Laewetz of harassing the leadership of the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan and, to quote directly, falsely perpetrating untrue communications that, redacted, is Métis but not your kind of Métis, and falsely claiming, redacted, as an unelected rando from Quebec. These communications by statement, interference, or innuendo are blatantly untrue, are harmful, unjustified, and in some instances may give rise to a legal claim against you, as they have caused and are continuing to cause reputational harm and other damages, including significant mental harm and anguish to redacted, and for which our client will hold you fully accountable. Now, Laewetz denies she did anything other than quote one of the leaders directly about his own Métis heritage. However, Laewetz has now been barred from attending meetings for asking about financial oversight. But Jennifer Laewetz won't be silent. Even though her story has been largely ignored by the mainstream media, Laewetz is tonight on The GUNN Show to discuss the futile attempts to silence those Métis voices calling for change and transparency. Here's her story. So joining me now is Jennifer Laewetz. She is from Saskatchewan. Jennifer, before we get into why we're talking to each other today, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and where your focus of your political activism is?
Yeah, so I am from Saskatchewan. I'm from a First Nation community in southern Saskatchewan. I've lived here my entire life. University of Saskatchewan alumni. My background is in political science with a proficiency in Indigenous governance. So a lot of my career was first and foremost in government. I worked for a Conservative MP from Saskatchewan for over 6 years, and then wanted to take that experience of knowing the inside and outside of government into political advocacy. So I've been kind of a fierce voice in the Indigenous realm for breaking down the barriers for Indigenous people to exist in whatever political camp they see fit. And then also strengthening governance. So a lot of my work now is revitalizing nations and getting us into a place of long-term sustainability, prosperity, and self-reliance. That's a big thing, is to get out of that cycle of relying on government. And yeah, so that's where a lot of my advocacy has been, and it hasn't been a smooth ride, but it's been a ride nonetheless. So
yeah, it sounds to me like you have some expertise in Indigenous governance, and I think in accountability and sort of what needs to happen to get certain First Nations to a certain level of self-sustainability. And how does that run you into the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan? Like, what problems, I guess, did you identify there?
there's, when it comes to Indigenous governance, it's obviously very complex, no matter if you're dealing with First Nations, if you're dealing with Métis people. But for me personally, a lot of my takes are rooted in ensuring that we're taking the capacity that the federal government is giving us and actually legitimately creating long-term sustainable solutions. So when I'm observing government structures that are almost creating more, self-reliancy or whatever it might be, that's kind of where my focus goes. And then when I start noticing that high level corruption, that's what really the light bulb goes on, because in our systems there's so much that people don't understand, and it's very easy for people to say, oh, there's corruption, there's mismanagement, but a lot of the time it's just dealing with crappy systems. But with the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, it was very interesting because my local regional director from the city I live in was actually suspended from the table until she apologized to the CEO. And that's where the alarm bell started going off for me, because I was like, whoa, 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 a CEO in an Indigenous governance is already unique in itself, because that's not typical in government structures, in federal politics, provincial politics, and Indigenous government. So I'm like, whoa, 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 a CEO, like this isn't a corporation. And, I had seen their press conference, I had seen their statements where they were, being told that they had allegedly harassed the CEO. Their complaints against him were unfounded, but his were upheld. And when I started kind of digging deeper, I'm like, where did the CEO come from within the ministry and the federal government with the Métis Nation? Because they used to be under third-party management, because when a government can't manage themselves, the federal government essentially comes in, allegedly, in my opinion, to help you manage yourself. And this guy was working on the government side of things. And then before you know it, he's the CEO. And then there's an MNLA last fall, which is their legislative body, essentially, have a meeting, and he's presented a Métis card, but he's, from Quebec or Ontario, one of the two. And all of a sudden he's given a Métis card. So I guess there were a lot of questions regarding that. How did this come to be? And, we're seeing, even during the Bill C5 meetings, we're seeing the president shaking hands with the prime minister. And we're like, oh, everything looks really good on paper. But behind the scenes, we have people asking questions that are barred from the table. I've went through their annual report and I'm seeing, $117 million from the federal government to operate. And I'm like, what is going on? And I have never been threatened legally so quickly by a body ever. And that was what raised questions for me. It was like they were attacking academics, activists, Métis lawyers. And I was like, there's a bigger picture here for sure.
So, and we'll get to, the legal threats leveled at yourself and basically anybody who is asking any questions. But what specific questions do you think are not being answered here? You sort of touched on a few, but I see people protesting, looking for a forensic audit. Not that I had no idea, but for me to go to my local community, I can actually just go online and see where all the money's going. And I don't think a lot of Canadians understand that that is frequently not the case in Indigenous and Métis communities.
It's very interesting because First Nations is a lot different. I hear a lot of conversations where people say, Justin Trudeau did get rid of the Transparency Act. I would caution on that by saying that there are still, almost like safety measures in place, so that nation members aren't taken advantage of. A lot of nations still submit their audits, but also the funding is so heavily regulated that if your reports aren't done, the funding is cut off. ISC does still have that magnifying glass on nations. Granted, it's more bureaucratic now than it's ever been, but with the Métis Nation, they're not under those same parameters. So we're kind of going off of what we can see, and it's a little bit more tricky because it almost seems like they're not even under, in my opinion, as much scrutiny as First Nations are. So it's almost like this body that a lot of people aren't paying much attention to.
Yeah.
That I'm like, whoa, like, look at this. This is a government. It's not. It's registered, I believe, as a nonprofit. Maybe I don't even know how that's done, but the federal government is funding them to the tune of over $100 million a year, and it doesn't seem like many people are paying attention to that. So that's where my questions came in: is like, how are they managed? How is the federal government ensuring safe barriers in there so that it's not mismanaged, it's not misused, so there's no corruption or fraud or any of those things? But I didn't see as much heavy scrutiny on them as I do with nations.
So how does the governance structure work? Is it, like voting, like municipal elections? How do you find out how do you determine who's in charge?
Well, that's a really good question, because that brings us back to the conversation around the CEO. It is a democracy, quote unquote. I would caution heavily using the word democracy when I'm getting threatened legally. But there is voting. There was just an election that took place this spring where they are trying to advance themselves as a government, but then you're seeing elected officials suspended from the table indefinitely until they apologize to a CEO. So the CEO holds a lot of centralized power, in my opinion, and he's able to make those decisions. And that's where a lot of the questions come in, because CEOs are not typical in government structures. So it's also new for us. And we're like, how do we actually ensure there's transparency when you can put that power into the hands of somebody like a CEO or a COO at the top, and then hide behind the cloak of don't attack employees, don't attack private citizens, but they're playing central roles.
Right. From what I can understand outside looking in, they're sort of trying to make this a workplace harassment issue when it's simply people wanting to know where all the money's going. What sort of sent off red flags about, about the finances for you?
One of the biggest red flags was when my regional representative told me that she has not been privy to his contract. So that was a major red flag for me, when I'm like, you mean to tell me that you're sitting at the governance table as a member of the PMC, which is the Provincial Métis Council, as a former minister in that self-government, as a regional representative, and she is not privy to that contract? She cannot look me in the face and tell me how much money that CEO makes a year. I understand that there are certain contracts and public employees, that are, I'm a civil public servant, that my salary was not public, but it wasn't a lot of money. But we know when you're a CEO, you're at the top level. And not only that, when I read the motion that was passed a couple months ago, stating that he is being given a payout because of those harassment allegations, that is published on their website as a motion to pay him out a settlement regarding those harassment allegations. How much was the settlement? Who did this investigation? what do they determine harassment is, and why is he still employed? I don't know any other instance where a government gives someone essentially hush money. Normally, you sign a release and see you later. Not
Right.
here's your money, and we're going to continue protecting you while these elected officials are still suspended from the table.
And so the elected officials get suspended from the table. People start asking questions. You're one of them. But I mean, it's normal people, it's prominent people. They want to know what's going on in the Métis government. And then you all, well, most of you, almost simultaneously get hit with a legal threat, cease and desist, shut up, you're harassing us. You know, what does that look like? Does it send a chill across everybody? You don't seem like you're being quiet, but I imagine there are a few people who are just like, I can't deal with this.
There are a few. I think that their hope was that this would scare people enough to silence them. I am privileged in the fact that I come with a lot of knowledge and expertise in governance. So it's really easy for me to debunk a lot of the arguments that are coming in, like saying, oh, don't harass a public citizen or a private citizen. But I mean, you have a CEO in your government. Most governments don't have CEOs. So it's
Right.
kind of the argument there. It's easy to kind of dismantle some of that. But for me, it is concerning because there are a lot of conversations around Indigenous governance where there's the non-Indigenous people that are scared to ask questions because we've created this culture
Mhm.
of it's going against reconciliation, it's going against being a good ally. When you point fingers, you ask questions, but the corruption can almost breed in those type of environments that we're creating. So I also feel a sense of responsibility where it's like, well, as an Indigenous person and someone that's, paved my own way through life, I put myself through school, there's never been handouts. I've always worked hard. I own my own home. I almost feel this sense of responsibility to be one of the ones that comes in and says, whoa, 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 this is actually not right. Here is not only the questions I'm asking, but I want to give everyone the tools to ask those questions so that not only we have governance structures that function, but we also can be proud of what we're putting out there publicly that the rest of Canada and taxpayers are watching, because right now it's embarrassing. It feels embarrassing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is the right of every Canadian to know what their government's doing. It just seems like such a basic thing. And then to find out people who are asking questions of the Métis Nation that they're getting hit with these cease and desist letters. Now, give me a Coles Notes version of what your cease and desist letter said.
Yeah, so it was actually like really a silly cease and desist in my most humble opinion because it came really quickly and I think they were very sloppy in the fact that there were two things that they are not happy with me about. The first is that I called him an unelected rando from Quebec. So that one is interesting because they're fighting about the fact that he's a private citizen. So yes, you are unelected. In my personal opinion, you're a rando. I don't know you. I don't know where you came
Yeah.
from. And then from Quebec, even if you're from Quebec or Ontario or Alberta or BC, in anyone's minds, why is that defamation? Why are you upset that that's brought up?
That's
The second
accurate.
piece,
Like it's just a
Yeah.
fact.
and then the second piece is they took from my Twitter thread where I said he was reportedly asked whether or not he was Métis, and he reportedly and allegedly said, not your kind of Métis, but they paraphrased in the cease and desist and said that I basically said he's not our kind of Métis, but that's not what I said. So it was very strange in that regard. And what was the most concerning was at the end when they told me that I am now barred from their meetings. So I have never signed a code of conduct. I have never been disruptive in any of their meetings. And, I have an elder Métis grandmother that I can now no longer take to any Métis meeting because I will probably be kicked out. And if I don't comply, I'll probably be arrested. So
That is absolutely outrageous. And I saw you pointing out on your Facebook page that you have security clearance. You can wander the halls of the House of Commons of this country, and yet you can't go and find out what's going on at your local government.
yeah, being a previous staffer, I obviously don't have security clearance anymore, but I haven't broken the law since then. But
Right.
yes, I had, not the very top security clearance,
Sure.
but it was reliability clearance. I worked for a member of parliament. There's been times I've scanned in, went into the House of Commons, I've ran into ministers, I've crossed the halls with MPs, I've spoken face to face with national political party leaders. There's never been a concern there. I was just in the Premier of Saskatchewan's office during budget day with some chiefs that I work with. Never been an issue ever. But now at this level, I'm treated like a criminal. And I also would ask, is everyone that's involved in your governance structure also able to pass a security clearance? Have they, if they were to move to the federal government structure? That's a question I'd be willing to ask.
Well, and, just getting back to the cease and desist letters, they aren't cheap. In the course of work, I work, with lawyers quite a fair bit. And, lawyers, every little bit of their time costs money. And to send out like dozens and dozens of cease and desist letters, that's a lot of money. And, when you're asking questions about where's all the money going, and then they waste a bunch of money paying lawyers to shut people up, it only poses more questions.
Especially because it goes down to the conversation. I know the Minister of Ethics or Justice or Self-Determination, whatever the name is today that's being used, he was recorded on AP10 saying, no programs have been affected by this. And it's like, well, like if you take money from one place and spend it, it's less money that you have. Like that's just simple math at this point. But also it's the infamous, well, we're still helping people. We're giving them services. We're giving them programs. It's textbook. Don't ask any questions because at least we're delivering something. And I have seen that out of some of the critics. I won't lie. I do have some of their critics that come in my comment sections. It's been interesting because there's always some connection back to, some of them have the same last name as the president.
Right.
The president's wife is liking comments. Like come on.
It's clear.
But it's like, well, they're doing more for citizens now than they ever have. It's like, but they're receiving a lot of money from the federal government now. Back in the day when I first remember the Métis Nation, it isn't what it is now. The government is heavily supporting them. There's a lot of funding there, just like they are in any nation right now because of the governance building piece. But just because they're delivering programs doesn't mean people don't have a right to ask questions. Like that doesn't even make sense in any free and open democracy.
So what comes next? I guess what comes next with you trying to get transparency and accountability? And then I guess I'll pose a second part to that question. How do we fix this? Because this seems like it's a systemic hole that they are wiggling through.
I think there's two pieces. There's the fight that can't stop. And it's also ensuring that when these types of things happen, we don't back down easily because people are watching and they want to know that there's safety and there's a path forward for using your voice in these instances and taking on that piece of self-responsibility where it's like, as Indigenous people, we have a responsibility to be holding these people accountable. And then the second piece is for the non-Indigenous people to not alienate us during this time. There's a lot of stereotypes out there. There's a lot of things that people have legitimate questions on. Don't paint us all at the same brush. Some of us are your friends. We are your neighbors. We are your, we're a part of your same society and we want the exact same things you do. So I'm asking, don't come with the racist hammer and thinking we're all bad people because we're not. Right. There's some of us that are fighting for that accountability and transparency. And we need that allyship right now. And it's just watch carefully the ones that are being silenced and what that looks like. And make the connections back to the government too, because the government does play a role. I've looked up who some of the former lobbyists are for the Métis Nation, and when I go to the lobby registry, which is public, and I see old former ministers' names like Sheila Copps, there's a lot of questions there. So just paying attention to kind of all the moving pieces, and don't think it's just immune to our little fight internally. Yeah. It always connects back to other government structures, almost always.
Good grief. Is there not a corrupt thing that Sheila Copps is not involved in? That woman, she's like an octopus. She's got hands and everything. Is there a legislative piece that you think needs to change here?
That's a hard one because I'm not a fan of creating more government.
Right.
I am very much like, I want to live quietly in my home in Saskatchewan and be left alone from government. So I'm like, I don't want more government. It never ends good. Like, to me, it's that self-responsibility piece where like we have to take responsibility for ourselves, for our kids. We have to raise them right. I know I just had a thread on Twitter about this, that's really the only thing that's going to fix this is when we start getting back to good values and raising our kids to be respectful and follow the law. And then we lead by example. Like it's really a matter of you cannot put your interests above anyone else's. And that goes for politicians in any capacity. The minute you start doing that and you're more worried about protecting your power and your position, everything else falls apart.
I think too, you can't be scared. Like you just can't be scared. You know who's scared right now? The people at the top in the Métis Nation. They're very scared. They're the ones sending out the cease and desist letters. They're scared of the normal people, and I think it's important for the normal people to remember that they really do hold more power than they think they do.
Mhm. Oh, for sure. Like I often wonder whether or not they think what I've said publicly is all that I know about the
Right.
situation, because I'm a very thorough person and my DMs are a wild ride. And I know, there's been talk that I've even been discussed at that table allegedly. And, there's been accusations that I'm even working for the women that have been suspended from the table, and I'm hired by them. And I would love to challenge that legally, but it's okay apparently on other people's fronts to say whatever they want to, except for us on the bottom. So
Now, Jennifer, I know you do this basically out of the love of transparency and accountability. Is there a way that people can support what you're doing or learn more about what you're doing?
yeah, I guess just, take the time to listen to our videos and our posts. I know, some of these people are new to the media realm and they're new to the communications realm, that some of their posts, it might not seem as structured and
Yeah.
as to the point, because they're new, right? Like some of these people are new to talking about government and what it looks like to exist in government spaces. So give us grace, give us patience, and don't just listen to the loudest voices. There's some smaller guys out there that are really trying to paint some accountability across government structures. They're just not as listened to. And also make sure that people are listening to the media outlets exactly like yourself and APTN and some of the ones that
Mhm.
are willing to hear us out, because people automatically go to mainstream media waiting for the legitimacy and thinking that mainstream media are the ones that are going to provide that. But we're being threatened legally and we're being
Mhm.
silenced, and mainstream media has been nowhere to be found. And that's
Right.
been really frustrating.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, as Canadians, we all want the same thing
Mhm.
by and large. I think we all want, well, most of us want smaller government and smaller government. Ooh, my dog, smaller government that is more accountable to the people that they're supposed to serve, that they should serve the people and not themselves. And I think that goes across all backgrounds.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that.
Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for speaking with me. And thank you for being brave enough to keep talking, even when people want to shut you up. As regular viewers know, the last portion of the show belongs to you. That's why I give you my email address right now. I want to know what you thought about my interview with Jennifer Laewetz and what you think about transparency in all government, not just Indigenous government, and the people's right to know what their government is doing behind closed doors, or if the government should have a right to close the doors to the people that they work on behalf of. So I'll give you my email address. Like I said, it's sheila@rebelnews.com. Send me an email, put gun show letters in the subject line so I know why you're emailing me, and you might just see your email read on air. Now, speaking of the government trying to silence people, I don't know if you saw this week, but our Rebel News alumnus, who is now over at Juno/Countersignal, Keean Bexte, he got a threat and he is being investigated by Elections Canada for his reporting during the writ period, particularly on Thomas Keeper, a Liberal candidate in Calgary. Take a listen to the video that Keean published about what's happening to him.
I am being criminally investigated. I just received the letter from the government, from the Office of Canada's Election Commissioner, informing me that I'm being investigated for my reporting during Canada's 45th general election. The stories in question detail the alleged history of Thomas Keeper, someone you probably know of by now. He's the now fired Liberal candidate for Calgary Confederation. Juno News worked diligently to ensure the accuracy of what we published, and nothing then or now undermines its truth. We went above and beyond to ensure that we were reporting facts that were in the public interest. We not only gave the Liberal candidate, Thomas Keeper, chance after chance to answer very troubling allegations, he refused. I even hand-delivered an envelope with our questions to his office, and instead of responding, he called the police on me and lied, accusing me of assault. Now, the entire encounter was recorded, caught on camera, and the video makes it abundantly clear that his allegation was false, and within hours of our publication, what do you know, the Liberal Party fired him. Some Conservatives wish that we had waited, that our newsroom had held the story until after the nomination so that Keeper would be stuck on the ballot after the nomination deadline, and it would secure the seat for Conservatives. But journalism is not about party strategy, it's about informing the public. During an election, no less, and that's what we did. Now Mark Carney, he's furious, and he's using an authoritarian law implemented by Justin Trudeau to investigate me for the crime of reporting news that humiliated the Liberal Party of Canada. In Iran, I'd be executed for embarrassing the regime. In North Korea, I'd be sent to a labor camp. In China, I'd be carted off to some off-the-book black site and never heard from again. And in Canada, I'm threatened with up to 5 years in federal prison and a devastating $50,000 fine. I don't know how long this fight will last, or if I'll be in prison by this time next year, but I do know this. If it goes to trial, I will take it to the Supreme Court of Canada. And those justices, 6 of 9, who were appointed by Justin Trudeau, will be forced to declare once and for all whether freedom of the press still exists in this country. A more complete picture of this investigation, including the commissioner's letter that I just read, will be published at defendjuno.com. You can read it for yourself. It's all there.
So some of you may know that I am also the president of the Independent Press Gallery of Canada. I am tasked with doing what I can to advocate on behalf of independent journalists and in the name of freedom of the press. Wherever a journalist is hassled or censored, I try to do what I can to advance their rights. And so I just want to read to you what we wrote at the Independent Press Gallery in defense of Keean Bexte. And I should tell you that I have been investigated by Elections Alberta for the crime of writing a book and then publishing it during the writ period. The book was on Rachel Notley. It was called Stop Notley. And I was investigated because to promote the book, I had lawn signs that said Stop Notley. The book was called Stop Notley, but they tried to say that that was an election finance violation instead of a marketing campaign for a book. So I know what Keean's going through here. We said at the Independent Press Gallery that the Independent Press Gallery of Canada condemns the criminal investigation launched against journalist Keean Bexte and Juno News under Section 91(1) of the Canada Elections Act. Bexte is facing potential charges for his reporting on Liberal candidate Thomas Keeper, reporting that was sourced, corroborated, and followed by the Liberal Party itself, dropping Keeper from the ballot. They don't seem to be suing Keean for the substance of his claims. They are suing him or threatening to investigate him, for the timing of his reporting. Like, when are you supposed to report on the Liberal candidate in the election, except in the election, right? Section 91(1) has already been ruled unconstitutional by Ontario courts and condemned as vague, unnecessary, and dangerous to free expression. Using it against independent media is censorship by prosecution and a chilling threat to democracy itself. This case is part of a disturbing pattern. In the 2025 election campaign, it was rife with targeting of independent journalists by the Liberal Party and its leader, Mark Carney. Journalists from independent outlets, including Juno News, were repeatedly barred from Carney's press conferences, where police were even used to keep reporters from asking questions. Now, post-election victory, the Liberal government is escalating from exclusion to criminalization through the abuse of an overreaching and purposefully murky law. The IPG stands with Juno News. Censorship by prosecution cannot be allowed to replace accountability. Free elections require a free press. If you're watching this and you are an independent journalist, I suggest you head on over to independentpressgallery.ca and join. You get a press card and training on defamation. We just did a defamation training, and we have other skills development seminars with lawyers that you can ask questions to in the works. So independentpressgallery.ca. Now, I wanted to see what you guys were saying about what's happening to Keean. So I went over to the comment section on the interview that Ezra did on his show, as I'm recording this Wednesday, so I think it was on Tuesday's show. Rochelle says, the public have a right to know the character of whom they are voting for. When confronted, Mr. Keeper lied about being assaulted. That is true, actually. And called the police. That right there proves what his character is. Calling the police and lying is a crime, and he made false allegations about Mr. Bexte, as the video proves. That is true. He had a chance to respond to questions and add up a lie to avoid answering them instead. That doesn't look good for him. Yeah. Keean tried to put what he had to Mr. Keeper, as is your responsibility as a journalist. If you are making allegations against someone, you need to give them the right to respond. And Keean did that, but instead of responding, Mr. Keeper engaged in what I would suggest is a waste of police resources and a false claim of assault. Captured on video. And now he's filed, or someone has, complained to Elections Canada. Canada Suburb says the Liberal Party kicked him out. It wasn't Keeper. He was devastated. Reliable witness here. Well, I'd like to see what evidence you have. Alpha Skeptic says the voting public needs to know the facts about those who run for election. Unlike the mainstream media, Rebel, Juno, Keean, and other independents work hard to provide the information that informed electors need to cast their votes. And again, if Keeper didn't do the things, whatever it is that Keean says that he was doing, whatever it is that anybody says that he was doing, when someone gives you the right to respond, now's your chance. You can't say they said things about me and didn't give me the right to respond. Keean gave him a right to respond, which would protect him from any defamation lawsuit, which is why they're not suing him for defamation, I think. Thomas Law, LL1HW, says, what did Mr. Keeper allegedly do exactly? Very suspicious that the Liberals opted not to run their candidate. You obviously found something of substance. You know what? I'll just show you what Keeper did. This is from Juno. They say, our exclusive report detailed firsthand accounts from multiple sources who claim Keeper engaged in a pattern of abusive behavior. One source, Brett Pierce, so Keean even named his sources, recalled his unsettling conversation with Keeper. He said he was talking about how whenever he wants to have sex with his wife, he just forces her to do so. I said, is she okay with that? He's like, I'm her husband. She has to be okay with it. Another Calgary businessman who has had intimate dinner conversations with Keeper told Juno News the subject of the Liberal candidate's marriage came up so often that he finally challenged him. She complains about him forcing himself on her. She's like, it's horrible, the witness recounted. Additional accounts from former associates described a public incident where Keeper's behavior turned violent. These allegations, among others detailing verbal abuse and disregard for consent, paint a picture of a candidate whose private conduct stands in stark contrast to the image he projected on the campaign trail. In the wake of Juno's report, Thomas Keeper withdrew his candidacy. Juno reached out to the Liberal Party for clarification regarding their vetting process, and the report is based on direct recorded interviews and corroborated firsthand testimony. Any allegations remain unproven in a court of law. Keean did reach out to Thomas Keeper directly, and he chose to instead file a false police report. So, and now, since that didn't work, the Liberal Party is using Elections Canada to go after Keean. And this is just a pattern of abuse and behavior of those in charge to use the systems before them against the people asking the questions. And if you want to support Keean Bexte and Juno News, you can go to defendjuno.com because I believe he's going to need a little bit of help. Well, everybody, that's the show for tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see everybody back here in the same time, in the same place next week. And as always, don't let the government tell you that you've had too much to think.